Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Pancetta Primavera Rigatoni. That's right, pasta primavera is almost always vegetarian, but I'm going to show you my favorite way to make it not that. And I'm going to do that using what is probably my favorite pasta shape. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the primavera portion of the program. And my collection of spring greens will include some parsley, Italian parsley to be exact, some nice sweet basil, and then speaking of sweet, the sweetest herb of them all, fresh mint. And then besides the herbs, I'm also going to do some asparagus, which we will cut up into like half-inch pieces. And then we'll also do some freshly sliced green onions, as well as some English peas, which the folks at the grocery store were nice enough to shuck for me. And now that we've covered the green, we can move on to the protein, which for me is going to be about a half pound of pancetta, which some people call Italian bacon, but I don't, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And pancetta is simply a rolled and cured pork belly. So to prep this, we will unroll it, and then cut it into manageable pieces. And since I want this diced, I'm going to cut it into strips. And as you well know, once we have strips cut, we simply turn them and then cut across, hopefully producing a nice uniform dice. And if you want to cut yours a little larger or a little smaller, go ahead. But the important thing is to get these as even as possible so that they cook at the same rate. And by the way, the reason you probably shouldn't call this Italian bacon is because pancetta is just cured and not smoked, whereas bacon is almost always smoked, and also tends to be sweeter since it's usually cured with sugar. But anyway, we'll go ahead and dice that up as shown, at which point we'll head to the stove, and we will transfer that into a nice large pan, in which we've drizzled a couple tablespoons of olive oil, and we'll set our heat to medium, and we'll cook this pancetta, stirring occasionally, until it's reached the exact doneness we want. And some of my Italian friends are going to have a problem with how far I go with this. Okay, I really do prefer mine nicely browned, whereas in general, my Italian friends will cook it less, and it will be lighter in color, and not quite as much of the fat will render out. So you'll have to decide how far to go. I mean, you are after all the Carlo Medioni of how to do the pancetta for your rigatoni. But personally, I do like to take it this far. And if some of the smaller pieces I cut are turning from golden brown to golden black, that's fine. That is really not going to affect the taste. And that's it. Once our pancetta is looking exactly how we want, we will turn off the heat, and we'll do two things. The first would be to reserve a couple spoons of the pancetta, so we could use that to garnish the top. And also, I do like to remove some of the rendered fat, using a couple wadded up paper towels and some tongs. Right, you can leave it all in there, since that is the base of the sauce, but I generally remove about half, leaving a couple tablespoons. And then what we'll do is toss in our green onions, and turn our heat back on to medium-low, and we'll just soften those slightly in that hot fat for a couple minutes. At which point we'll turn off the heat completely until we're ready for final assembly. And while all that was happening, we've brought some salted water to a boil, in which we will cook our rigatoni. And as you can see, we also have our vegetables nearby, because what I like to do is 2 minutes before my pasta is going to be cooked, I'll toss in the vegetables and cook those right in the same water, which I think is a pretty fun and efficient system. And since these short rigatoni, also known as mezzi rigatoni, only take about 9 minutes, I'll be tossing my veggies in at the 7-minute mark. And yes, I do set a timer, since there's no way I'm going to remember. And that's it. While our pasta is cooking, we can put together the last component, which I'll do by adding my herbs to this blender cup, along with some peeled garlic, plus the juice of half a lemon, and then last but not least, a splash of cold fresh water. And what we'll do is blend this until it's nice and smooth, and then we'll use that to finish our pasta in a couple minutes. And yes, it is probably better to use a real blender, but real blenders are much harder to clean than these stick blenders. And this seems to do a great job for me, so I went with the immersion blender, but you can use either. And that's it. Once blended, we'll head back to the stove, where my mezzi rigatoni has been cooking for 7 minutes, which means I can toss in my asparagus and peas. And since the pieces are so small, and they are tender young vegetables, just a couple minutes in this pasta water is plenty. And since they are so sweet and tender, once the pasta is cooked, move on to the next step, no matter how long your veggies have been in. Speaking of which, once our pasta is perfect, we'll go ahead and use a spiderweb strainer to transfer everything into our pan. And I should mention, for a less exciting method for the vegetables, you can just blanch them for a couple minutes ahead of time, and then shock them in cold water, and then reserve them and add it at this point. But I think trying to time it for the end of the pasta water is much more thrilling. And who doesn't want to make their pasta production a little more thrilling? Oh, and it's totally fine that some water is coming with the rigatoni. All right, not only is that not bad, it's good. And then once transferred in, we'll set our heat to medium-low, and we will dump in our spring herb smoothie, and we'll give everything a quick stir. And once we've given that a quick mix, we will stop and add some salt, as well as a generous drizzle of extra virgin olive oil, followed by the secret ingredient, a little splash of the pasta water. Oh yeah, we're definitely going to need a little bit of that. And then we'll take our spatula and give this a thorough stirring. And again, we're on medium-low heat, since we want to heat that herb mixture through. And don't worry if it looks a little bit juicy at this point. All right, that rigatoni is continuing to absorb water. And if it's not juicy at this stage, by the time you go to eat it, it might be a little bit on the dry side. And that's it. Once mixed, we'll add our last ingredient to the pan, which is some finely and freshly grated pecorino cheese. And we'll go ahead and turn off the heat and stir that in. And yes, of course you can use Parmesan instead, as long as it's the real stuff, Parmigiano Reggiano. And then once we blended the cheese in, besides tasting it for salt, we are ready to serve up, which I like to do in a bowl, since it's going to keep our rigatoni hotter longer. And also, I like to eat this with a spoon, and using a spoon on a plate is a bad look. And then we will finish up with a little more grated cheese. And then assuming you didn't eat it all, which you probably did, but if you didn't, we'll finish up with our reserved pancetta, plus maybe one more pinch of green onion. Although since we're doing a primavera, we should call it spring onion. And that's it, our Pancetta Primavera Rigatoni is ready to enjoy. And that, my friends, really is a tremendous bowl of pasta. Right, thanks to all that pancetta, it's rich and decadent. But thanks to all those herbs and veggies, it's also fresh and vibrant. And of course, as usual, I really want you to focus on the technique here, knowing that you have complete freedom to switch up the ingredients and use different herbs or vegetables or different amounts, or maybe use butter and olive oil or a different cheese. All right, when you master something like this, you're not just learning one recipe, you're learning like 100, since the production steps are going to be the same no matter what you put in. Oh, and one other very obvious thing, you can definitely use any kind of pasta you want. But the reason I like these little half rigatoni is because all those little bits of veggies and pancetta are actually finding their way inside the pasta, which I believe really is the magic behind a dish like this. And I will admit that these olive oil-based sauces are not my favorite for pasta. All right, I'm very much a tomato sauce guy, and once in a while a cream sauce guy. But when I do feel like taking a little bit of break from the usual, especially when it's springtime, I can't think of any other pasta I'd rather be eating. Which is why no matter what shape pasta you use, or exactly what you toss in, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.